The deep space sensors picked up the fleet at exactly 1432 Earth Standard Time. 4,217 ships. They came out of hyperspace like a dark cloud, spreading across the black emptiness beyond Neptune. And every alarm on Gyungong Orbital Research Station started screaming at once. Hana was drinking her third cup of coffee when the alerts hit her screen. She set the cup down slowly and stared at the numbers. Then she checked them again. Then she checked them a third time, because numbers like that did not make sense. No fleet that large had ever entered human space. Not in 100 years. Not since the last war, and nobody liked to talk about that one. She picked up her communicator and called UEDC High Command. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. This is lead researcher Hana at Gyungdong Station. We have a massive hyperspace exit event at Sector 9, beyond Neptune orbit. I am reading over 4,000 warships. This is not a drill. 600 million kilometers away, on Earth, Admiral Ji-hun was standing in a cemetery. He wore his dress uniform, the dark navy one with the silver stars on the collar, and he was laying a wreath at the memorial of the fallen. Every year he came here. Every year he stood before the names of the soldiers who died in the last Great War and promised them it would not happen again. His communicator buzzed in his pocket. He read the message. He read it again. Then he closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath, the kind of breath a man takes when he knows the world is about to change. 20 minutes later, Ji-hun walked onto the bridge of the UEDC flagship, Iron Will. The bridge crew stood at attention. Captain Yuna was already at her station, her face hard and focused. She had served under Ji-hun for 11 years, and she knew his expressions better than anyone. When she saw his face, she knew this was real. How many? Ji-hun asked as he took his seat. Over 4,000 confirmed, Yuna answered. Configuration matches Drenari conquest fleet patterns. Full military formation. They are heading inward. Ji-hun nodded slowly. The Drenari. He had read the intelligence files years ago. A powerful empire that had conquered over 90 species across 3 galactic sectors. They moved from system to system, taking what they wanted, destroying what they did not need. They had never been stopped. They had never met a species that could say no and make it stick. Until now, they had never come to human space. Taeho, Ji-hun said calmly. The young communications officer turned in his chair. Yes, Admiral? Open an unrestricted broadcast channel to the incoming fleet. All frequencies, all languages in our translation database. Make sure they hear every word. Taeho's fingers moved across his console. Channel open, sir. The bridge went quiet. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Ji-hun leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke, his voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was the voice of a man who had buried too many friends and did not want to bury more. Attention, incoming fleet. This is Admiral Ji-hun of the United Earth Defense Command. You have entered sovereign human space. You are not welcome here. You have 12 standard hours to reverse your course and leave the way you came. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is your only warning. There will not be a second one. He nodded to Taeho, who closed the channel. Then Ji-hun sat back in his chair and waited. On the other side of the solar system, aboard the Drenari command ship, Wrath of Empire, Grand Overseer Vorath received the message. He was a tall creature, broad and armored with natural bone plates across his shoulders and skull. He had led the Drenari fleet for 40 years and had personally overseen the conquest of 26 worlds. He had watched civilizations burn and had felt nothing but satisfaction. He played the human message on the bridge speakers so his officers could hear it. When it finished, he laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the command deck. 12 hours, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. The prey gives us 12 hours. His officers laughed with him, all except one. Sub-Commander Rayla stood near the tactical display, and she was not laughing. She had spent the last 3 years studying potential targets in this region of the galaxy, and the file on humans had always bothered her. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it did not contain. There were gaps. Entire sections of military data that should have been available were simply missing, classified by species that had encountered humans and survived, species that refused to share what they knew. That silence worried her more than any weapon. "Grand Overseer," Rayla said carefully, stepping forward, "I recommend caution. Our intelligence on this species is incomplete. We do not have reliable data on their military capabilities. The gaps in the record mean they are hiding their weakness," Vorath interrupted. "Every soft species does this. They trade, they build, they talk about peace and cooperation. These are the signs of prey, Sub-Commander, not predators. With respect, sir, prey does not issue warnings with that kind of confidence. And no species in this region has been willing to tell us what humans are capable of. That is not normal." Vorath turned to look at her. His eyes were cold. "Are you suggesting we retreat because of a voice on a radio? Because one admiral told us to leave? I have heard 1,000 warnings from 1,000 species. They all sounded brave before we arrived. They all begged after." Rayla held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. She knew pushing further would cost her everything. Vorath turned to his communications officer. "Send a reply to the humans." The reply was short. 5 words. "We do not negotiate with prey." Back on the Iron Will, Tejo received the message. He played it on the bridge. The words hung in the air like smoke, and nobody spoke. Yuna looked at Jihan. The Admiral's face showed nothing. No anger, no surprise. Just a deep, heavy sadness, the kind that comes when you already know how a story is going to end, but you hoped it would be different. For a long time, Jihan said nothing. He looked at the stars on the main view screen, at the darkness between them, at the tiny cluster of red dots that represented 4,000 ships carrying millions of soldiers who did not know what they were walking into. Then he turned to Yuna and spoke quietly, so quietly that only she could hear. "Begin Protocol Sunset." Yuna did not hesitate. She had hoped she would never hear those words, but she had trained for them every day for 11 years. She picked up her communicator and started making calls. Across the solar system, in shipyards hidden inside asteroids, and beneath the surfaces of moons, lights turned on in places that had been dark for decades. Engines that had been sleeping began to wake up. Crews that had been waiting received a single coded message. The message said, "They chose wrong." And humanity began to prepare for what was coming. The clock started the moment Jihun gave the warning. 12 hours. That was what he promised the Drenari. 12 hours to turn around, to go home, to live. And while those hours counted down, humanity moved with a kind of quiet, practiced precision that would have terrified anyone smart enough to watch closely. On Earth, the evacuation protocols activated at 1500 EST. There were no sirens, there was no panic. In cities across every continent, people received a calm notification on their personal devices. It said the same thing it had always said during drills, except this time there was a small red symbol in the corner that meant it was not a drill. Parents picked up their children from school. Families walked to their designated shelters, underground complexes built deep into bedrock, stocked with food and water and air recyclers that could last for years. Every human alive had practiced this at least once. A mother in Busan held her daughter's hand as they walked down the long concrete ramp into the shelter beneath the city. The girl looked up at her and asked, "Is this the real one?" The mother smiled and squeezed her hand. It might be, but we have done this before, and we are very good at it. That was the thing about humans. They prepared. They prepared for things they hoped would never happen, and they did it so well that when those things finally did happen, they moved like water flowing downhill. Smooth, calm, unstoppable. 600 kilometers above Earth, Secretary General Sujin sat at the head of the United Earth Council's emergency chamber. The room was round, with seats for representatives of every major colony and territory in human space. The seats were full. Every face was serious. Sujin was a small woman with short gray hair and steady eyes. She had been a diplomat for 30 years before becoming Secretary General, and she had talked her way out of more crises than most people could name. But she knew, looking at the intelligence report on her screen, that talking was over. She asked one question. Did they refuse? The defense minister nodded. Grand Overseer Vorath responded with hostility. The exact words were, "We do not negotiate with prey." Sujin was quiet for a moment. Then she opened a drawer in her desk, took out a document that had been prepared years ago and kept sealed for exactly this kind of moment, and signed it. Authorization Order 7. Full military response. Unlimited engagement authority. She looked up at the council. May whatever gods they believe in have mercy on them, she said, because we have given them all the mercy we can. While Earth's civilians moved underground and its politicians signed orders, the real preparation was happening in the darkness of space. Captain Yuna stood at the tactical hologram on the bridge of Iron Will, and what she saw there was something the Drenari could never imagine. The visible defense fleet, the 300 ships positioned near Mars, was a lie. Not a bluff exactly, because those ships were real and dangerous, but a mask. A thin layer of truth, hiding something enormous underneath. Behind every moon in the solar system, inside hollowed-out asteroids, tucked into the magnetic shadows of gas giants, and floating in subspace pockets that bent light around them like invisible bubbles, there were more ships, many more. 3,200 warships, each one built in secret over the last century, each one carrying weapons that had never been tested in open combat, because there had never been an enemy stupid enough to require them. Stealth destroyers, heavy cruisers with adaptive armor, carrier groups loaded with AI-controlled drone swarms that could think faster than any living pilot. And at the center of it all, the Iron Will, Jihoon's flagship, which carried enough firepower to crack a small moon. Yuna coordinated their positions with quiet efficiency, sending encrypted orders through quantum-linked channels that could not be intercepted. She placed them in a three-dimensional formation that surrounded the Drenari's approach path from every angle. Above, below, left, right, front, and behind. A net made of steel and fire, waiting to close. On Gungang Station, Hana was not sleeping. She had not slept since the alert, and she would not sleep until this was over. She stood in the lowest level of the station, a restricted area that required 3 separate biometric scans to enter, and she stared at the machine that filled the room. Project Chendung, Thunder. It was not a bomb. It was not a beam weapon. It was a gravitational pulse generator, a device that could compress a targeted area of space with such force that anything inside it would be crushed to nothing. Not destroyed, not burned, simply compressed until it ceased to exist. It left no debris, no radiation, no evidence that anything had ever been there. Hana had designed it. She was proud of the science and terrified of the weapon. She had always hoped it would stay in this room forever, a thing that existed only as a possibility. She ran her hand along the cold metal casing and whispered to it, "Please stay asleep. Please let them be smart enough." Far from Earth, on the carrier Baiko, a young pilot named Doyun sat on the edge of his bunk and wrote a letter. He wrote it on actual paper, because there was something about putting pen to paper that felt more real than typing on a screen. The letter was to his mother. It was short. Mom, if you are reading this, it means I did not come back. I want you to know that I was not scared. That is a lie. I was very scared. But I went anyway because that is what you taught me to do. You said that courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the right thing while your hands are shaking. My hands are shaking right now. But I am going. I love you. Your son, Doyun. He folded the letter and tucked it into the inside pocket of his flight suit, right over his heart. Then he walked to the hangar bay where his fighter was waiting. Around him, hundreds of other pilots were doing the same thing. Some of them were quiet. Some of them were talking and joking, the way soldiers always do when they are trying not to think about what comes next. All of them were ready. The hours passed. The Drenari fleet crossed the orbit of Uranus, still accelerating, still coming. They showed no sign of slowing down or turning back. On the Wrath of Empire, Sub-Commander Rayla sat alone in her quarters and ran simulations. She had been running them all night. She plugged in different variables, different assumptions about human capability. She started with the lowest estimates, assuming humans were barely more advanced than the average conquered species. Even in those simulations, the Drenari took heavy losses. When she raised the estimates even slightly, the results became catastrophic. She went to Vorath one last time. She found him on the observation deck, watching the distant sun grow slowly brighter as they approached. "Grand Overseer," she said, "I have run every simulation I can. In not a single one do we achieve clean victory. In most of them, we lose badly. I am asking you, please, to reconsider." Vorath did not turn around. "You are afraid, Rayla. I do not blame you. But fear is not strategy. We have 4,000 ships. They have shown us 300. The math is simple. The math assumes we are seeing everything they have. What if we are not? Then we will adapt. We always do." Rayla stood there for a long moment, then turned and left. She had done everything she could. Whatever happened next was on his shoulders. The 12 hours expired at 0232 Earth Standard Time. The solar system was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something terrible. On the Iron Will, Taeho looked at Jihun. "The deadline has passed, Admiral. Do we send another message?" Jihun thought about it. Then he made a decision that surprised everyone on the bridge. "Yes," he said. "One more. But not words this time." He ordered Taeho to compile a data package. It contained the complete historical records of every species that had ever attacked humanity. The Vorlon, who brought a fleet of 600 ships and lost all of them in 40 minutes. The Teth Dominion, who bombarded a human colony and found their own homeworld blockaded within a week. 11 species in total. Each record showed the same pattern. A warning was given. The warning was ignored. What followed was total, absolute defeat. Taeho sent the package to every ship in the Drenari fleet. Every single one. Not just Vorath. Every captain, every officer, every soldier. Because Jihun believed that even in an enemy fleet, there might be someone smart enough to read it and understand. On the Wrath of Empire, the data package arrived. Vorath glanced at it, scoffed, and deleted it. He did not read a single word. In her quarters, Rayla opened the package and read every line. When she finished, she sat in the dark for a long time. Her hands were shaking. She understood now. The humans had not been threatening them. They had been trying to save them. And the Drenari had said no. The Drenari fleet crossed the orbit of Mars at 0317 Earth Standard Time, and Grand Overseer Vorath gave the order to fire. 4,000 ships opened up at once, plasma beams, fusion torpedoes, kinetic slugs the size of buildings. The barrage was so massive that it lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. A wall of destruction aimed directly at the 300 human ships that stood between the Drenari and Earth. On the bridge of Iron Will, the view screen turned white with incoming fire. The ship shuddered. Officers grabbed their consoles, but nobody panicked, because they had trained for this, and because the shields held. Not just held, the shields adapted. Every human warship carried something called reactive barrier technology. When a weapon hit the shield, the system analyzed the energy signature in less than 1,000th of a second and restructured the barrier to absorb that specific type of attack. The first shot hit hard, the second hit softer, the third barely registered. Within 30 seconds of the opening barrage, the Drenari's weapons were hitting walls they could not break. Vorath watched from his command chair as his tactical display showed impact after impact with 0 kills. His weapons were landing. He could see them landing, but the human ships were still there, still in formation, still holding their ground, as if the most powerful fleet in the galaxy was throwing rocks at a mountain. Increase power to all forward batteries, Vorath ordered. Concentrate fire on their flagship. 200 ships focused their fire on Iron Will. The flagship's shields flared bright blue under the assault, and for a moment it looked like they might buckle. But Yuna had prepared for this. She rotated the ship's shield harmonics, spreading the load across backup generators, and Iron Will weathered the storm like it was standing in a light rain. On the bridge, Jihan watched the tactical display. The red dots of the Drenari fleet were moving closer, pushing forward with the confidence of a force that had never been stopped. He let them come. He let them push deeper into the net, deeper into the formation that they could not see. And when the Drenari were exactly where he wanted them, surrounded on every axis with nowhere to run, Jihoon said one word. Unveil. Yuna relayed the order. Across the solar system, 3,200 stealth warships dropped their concealment at the same time. They rose from the shadow of Phobos and Deimos. They emerged from inside hollowed asteroids in the belt. They flickered into existence from subspace pockets near Jupiter's moons. They appeared behind the Drenari fleet, above it, below it, and on both sides of it. One moment, the Drenari were facing 300 ships. The next moment, they were surrounded by 3,500. On the Wrath of Empire, the tactical display changed so fast that the officers could not process what they were seeing. Red dots everywhere. Human warships in every direction, at every angle, filling the space around them like the walls of a cage that had just slammed shut. Rayla was standing at her console when it happened. She watched the numbers update, watched the count of enemy ships climb from 300 to over 3,000, and she felt something she had never felt in her entire military career. Hopelessness. Not fear, something deeper. The understanding that this was already over, that it had been over before it started, and that every moment from this point forward was just the universe catching up to a conclusion that was already written. She whispered, and her voice was barely audible over the alarms. They were never hiding from us. They were giving us room to leave. Yuna led the first attack wave. Iron Will surged forward, and with it came the full fury of human military engineering. The weapons that the Drenari faced now were nothing like the defensive shields they had been shooting at. These were offensive systems designed to end wars quickly. Kinetic accelerator cannons fired tungsten rods at a fraction of the speed of light. Each rod carried enough energy to punch through Drenari armor from front to back. Human destroyers fired in coordinated volleys, 3 ships targeting one enemy vessel at the same time, and Drenari cruisers that had survived decades of conquest were torn apart in seconds. EMP torpedoes detonated in clusters, sending electromagnetic pulses that overloaded Drenari power systems and left entire groups of ships drifting and dark. And then came the drones, thousands of them, AI-guided, moving in swarms that flowed like water around enemy formations. They were small and fast and impossibly coordinated, and they targeted engines, weapons, and communication arrays with surgical precision. They did not kill crews, they killed ships. Near the rings of Saturn, Doyun flew with the 7th Rapid Strike Wing. His fighter was fast, a single-seat interceptor built for speed and agility, and he was good at flying it. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he saw in his first real combat. A Drenari heavy cruiser, a ship 3 times the size of the carrier he had launched from, turned to engage a human destroyer. The destroyer was a quarter of its size. Doyun watched as the destroyer fired a single concentrated kinetic burst. The shot hit the cruiser amidships and cut it in half. The 2 pieces drifted apart, glowing orange at the edges, and the destroyer was already moving to its next target before the debris had stopped spinning. The veterans had told stories about human weapons. He had always thought they were exaggerating. They were not. He engaged a group of Drenari fighters that were trying to make an attack run on a human carrier. His weapons locked on, and he fired. The Drenari fighters were fast, but his targeting system was faster. 3 kills in 12 seconds. Around him, his wingmates were doing the same. The Drenari pilots fought bravely, but they were outmatched in speed, technology, and coordination. It was not a fair fight. It was never going to be. 2 hours into the battle, the numbers told a story that even Vorath could not ignore. The Drenari had lost over 1,100 ships, 1,100, nearly a quarter of his fleet, gone in 2 hours. Human losses stood at 14 ships out of 3,500. The ratio was so extreme that it almost did not feel real. But Vorath did not retreat. He could not retreat, because retreating meant admitting that he had been wrong, that the prey he had laughed at was stronger than his entire empire, and his pride could not survive that truth. So instead, he made the decision that Jihun had feared most. He activated the Drenari's planet-killing weapon, the plasma lance. It was a massive cannon mounted on the spine of the Wrath of Empire, designed to superheat a planet's atmosphere and burn everything on its surface. Vorath aimed it at Earth. If he could not win the battle in space, he would kill the humans where they lived. He would burn their homeworld and call it victory. The plasma lance fired. A beam of white-hot energy, wide enough to swallow a city, streaked across the solar system toward the blue planet that held 8 billion human lives. On Iron Will, Yuna saw it coming. Her blood went cold. "Admiral, they have fired a planetary weapon. Impact on Earth in 90 seconds. He pressed a button on his armrest and spoke calmly. "Station Dalbit, you are clear to engage." Dalbit was a defense platform hidden on the far side of Earth's moon. It had been there for 80 years, silent and waiting. When it received Jihun's order, it activated a spatial distortion field, a technology that bent the fabric of space itself like a lens-bending light. The plasma lance's beam, carrying enough energy to kill a world, curved. It bent away from Earth, arced through empty space, and dissipated harmlessly into the void. On the Wrath of Empire, Vorath stared at his screen. The beam had missed. Not because it was inaccurate, but because the humans had bent space to redirect it. He had not known that was possible. He had not known any of this was possible. For the first time in 40 years of conquest, fear entered his eyes. Jihun opened a broadcast channel, not to Vorath, to every ship in the Drenari fleet. Every soldier, every pilot, every crew member. His voice was calm and clear. Your commander was warned. He chose not to listen. But you still have a choice. Lay down your weapons and power down your engines. You will not be harmed. You will be treated with dignity and respect. Continue fighting, and we will end this. The choice is yours. The effect was immediate. 400 Drenari ships broke formation. Their weapons went dark. Their engines powered down. They surrendered, not because they were cowards, but because they could see the truth that Vorath refused to accept. This war was already lost. Vorath screamed at them. He ordered his remaining ships to fire on the deserters. But Rayla, standing at the weapons console, did not relay the order. She looked at Vorath with steady eyes and said, "No." It was the bravest thing she had ever done, because those 400 ships and every soul aboard them would survive because of that single word. Vorath had lost half his fleet. His planet-killing weapon had been turned aside like a toy. 400 of his own ships had surrendered to the enemy. His second-in-command had refused a direct order on his own bridge. Any rational commander would have seen the walls closing in and accepted defeat. But Vorath was not rational. He was something far more dangerous. He was proud. He stood in the center of his darkened bridge, surrounded by officers who no longer believed in the mission, and he activated a protocol that the Drenari had not used in over 200 years. It was called the Burning. The name came from an ancient Drenari war doctrine that said if you could not win, you made sure the enemy gained nothing from your defeat. Every ship in the Burning would overload its reactor core, turning the vessel into a flying bomb carrying enough energy to crack a continent. 2,000 ships, each one a weapon of mass destruction, aimed at one target, Earth. Vorath broadcast the order to his remaining fleet. All ships, activate Burning Protocol. Set course for the human homeworld. Maximum acceleration. We will not survive, but neither will they. The Drenari do not lose. If we cannot have victory, we will have annihilation. On Iron Will, Teho intercepted the broadcast. His face went white as he decoded it. He turned to Jihun and Yuna, and his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "Admiral, the remaining Drenari ships are overloading their reactors, all of them. They are making a suicide run at Earth. Over 2,000 ships, each one carrying a core detonation yield equivalent to a city-killing bomb." The bridge went silent. Yuna pulled up the tactical display. The red dots of the Drenari fleet had changed formation. They were no longer spread out in combat positions. They had compressed into a tight cone shape, a battering ram of ships pointed directly at Earth, accelerating hard. It was not a military maneuver. It was a final act of spite. Yuna ran the numbers quickly, her fingers flying across the console. "Admiral, our fleet can intercept and destroy the majority of them. But at their current acceleration and spread, we cannot guarantee we stop all of them. If even 50 ships get through with overloaded reactors and detonate in Earth's atmosphere or on the surface, the casualties will be—" She paused. She did not want to say the number. "Billions," Jihun finished for her. "The casualties will be in the billions." He sat in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. The bridge crew watched him. They had served with him for years, some of them for decades, and they had never seen him look the way he looked now. It was not fear. It was grief. The grief of a man who had tried everything to avoid what was about to happen and had run out of options. Jihun opened a private channel to Gumgang Station. Hana answered immediately. She had been watching the battle from her monitors, and she already knew why he was calling. "How ready is Chundung?" Jihun asked. Hana closed her eyes. She had prayed this call would never come. "It is ready, Admiral. We can fire within 4 minutes of authorization. But the radius, if we fire at this range, the pulse will cover the entire combat zone. It will not just hit the suicide ships, it will hit everything in the targeted sphere. Disabled ships, surrender ships that have not yet been collected, debris fields with possible survivors. Everything." "I know," Jihun said quietly, "and Admiral, this weapon has never been fired at this scale. The simulations say it will work, but simulations are not reality. If something goes wrong, she was quiet. Then she said, I need authorization from the Secretary General. Ji-hoon contacted Sujin. The Secretary General was still in the emergency chamber, still surrounded by the representatives of every human colony. She listened to Ji-hoon's report without interruption. When he finished, she asked the same question she always asked. Is there any other way? Ji-hoon told her the truth. We can stop most of them with conventional weapons, probably 90%. But 90% is not 100%, and the 10% that get through will kill more people than every war in human history combined. Sujin looked around the room, at the faces of the council members. Some of them were crying. Some of them were stone-faced. All of them knew what Chendung was. It had been the most classified program in human history for 60 years. A weapon so powerful that its very existence was considered a moral burden. Do it, Sujin said, and may we never need to use it again. Ji-hoon relayed the authorization to Hana. On Gungan Station, Hana walked to the control console of Project Chendung. Her team of 12 scientists stood behind her. Some of them were shaking. One of them was quietly reciting a prayer. Hana placed her hand on the activation panel. The system required a biometric scan and a voice confirmation. She pressed her palm to the sensor and spoke clearly. This is lead researcher Hana. Authorization confirmed. Firing Chendung. The machine woke up. It did not make a dramatic sound. There was no roar, no explosion of light. There was a low hum, a vibration that Hana felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. And then the station trembled slightly as the gravitational pulse generator aligned itself with the target coordinates. Chendung fired. The pulse was invisible. There was no beam, no flash, no projectile. What it did was compress space itself in a targeted sphere. A bubble of gravitational force so intense that everything inside it was crushed. Not destroyed in the way a bomb destroys things, leaving wreckage and fire and debris. Crushed in the way a giant hand might crush an insect. Completely, silently, absolutely. 1,500 Drenari ships were inside the targeted sphere when the pulse hit. They did not explode. They did not burn. They simply ceased to exist. One moment they were there, engines blazing, reactors overloading, screaming toward Earth on their mission of destruction. The next moment there was nothing, as if they had never been there at all. The remaining 500 ships in the suicide formation were outside the kill zone, but caught in the gravitational ripples at the edge of the pulse. Their systems overloaded. Their engines died. Their power failed. They drifted, dark and helpless, tumbling through space like leaves in a storm. On Iron Will, the bridge crew watched the tactical display update. 1,500 red dots vanished in an instant. 500 more went dark. The suicide run was over. Earth was safe. Nobody spoke. Nobody cheered. Yuna stood at her console with her hands flat on the surface, and she was shaking. Not from fear, from something she could not name. Taeho pulled off his headset and stared at the floor. A young officer, near the back of the bridge, was crying silently, tears running down her face as she looked at the empty space on the screen where 1,500 ships had been. In his cockpit, far from the epicenter, Doyen felt the gravitational ripple pass through his fighter like a wave in the ocean. His instruments flickered. When they came back online, he looked at his scanner and saw that a huge section of the battlefield was simply gone, clean, empty, as if someone had erased it. Near him a Drenari fighter was drifting. Its engines were dead, knocked out by the edge of the pulse. Through his canopy, Doyen could see the alien pilot inside, alive but helpless, hands raised in surrender. Doyen did not fire. He pulled his fighter alongside the Drenari craft and activated his tow beam, gently guiding the enemy ship toward the nearest human carrier for safe capture. They fought when they had to, and they stopped fighting the moment they could. On Gumgang Station, Pana stood at the console and stared at the readings. The weapon had performed exactly as designed, perfectly. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something heavy settle in her chest, a weight she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. She looked at her hands. They were the hands that had built Chandong, the hands that had fired it, the hands that had erased 1,500 ships and every living thing inside them in a single heartbeat. One of her scientists touched her shoulder. "Hana, it is over. You saved Earth." She nodded slowly. Then she walked to the corner of the room, sat down on the floor, put her face in her hands, and wept. On the Wrath of Empire, every light was out. The ship drifted in the dark, powerless, surrounded by the silence of empty space, where 1,500 of its companions had been moments before. Grand Overseer Vorath sat in his command chair and stared at nothing. The bone plates on his shoulders, which had always made him look powerful and imposing, now just made him look heavy, like a creature being pulled down by its own weight. Rayla stood beside him. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. Then Jihoon's voice came through the emergency speakers, powered by a human signal, so strong it could reach even dead ships. "All Drenari forces, your fleet is neutralized. Power down all systems and prepare to be boarded. You will not be harmed. This is over." Vorath heard the words. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he did not argue. 3 months passed. The wreckage was cleared. The prisoners were processed. The dead were counted. And the galaxy watched, the way it always watched when someone picked a fight with humanity, to see what the humans would do next. The numbers were entered into the official record, and they told a story that would be studied in military academies across 100 star systems for centuries to come. The Drenari Conquest Fleet had entered human space with 4,217 warships. Of those, approximately 600 had surrendered intact. The rest, over 3,600 ships, were destroyed. Human losses across the entire engagement, from the first shot to the last, stood at 31 ships and 4,700 personnel. Those numbers were not a victory, not to the humans. 4,700 people had died. 4,700 families received a message that their son or daughter or mother or father was not coming home. Admiral Jihoon signed every notification letter personally. It took him 11 days. He did not delegate it. He did not rush. He believed that if he could send people to die, the least he could do was write their names with his own hand. The political aftermath moved quickly. The United Earth Council convened a special tribunal for Grand Overseer Vorath. There was debate about what to do with him. Some voices called for execution. He had ordered a suicide attack on a civilian planet. He had tried to burn Earth. By any standard of justice, he had earned death 1,000 times over. But humanity did not execute prisoners. It never had. Not in 300 years of spacefaring civilization. It was one of the principles that defined them, one of the things that made them different from the empires they had defeated. They believed that killing a helpless enemy was not justice. It was revenge. And revenge was something they had decided long ago to leave behind. Vorath was sentenced to life confinement on a neutral station at the edge of human space. He was given a small room with a window that looked out at the stars. He was given food, medical care, and access to a library. And he was given something else, something that the judges considered the most important part of his punishment. He was given the complete historical records of every world the Drenari Empire had conquered, every species they had destroyed, every civilization they had burned. He was required to read them, all of them, every name, every culture, every story that his empire had erased. The judges believed that a man who had never understood the weight of what he had done should be made to carry it. Rayla cooperated fully, from the moment she was taken into custody. She provided intelligence on the Drenari Empire's internal structure, its military deployments, its conquered territories, and most importantly, the locations of species still living under Drenari occupation. She did not do this to save herself. She did it because she had read the data package that Jehun had sent before the battle, the one that Vorath had deleted without reading. And she understood now that the humans had been trying to save the Drenari, not threaten them. She wanted to help the species that had shown her that kind of mercy, even to an enemy. Humanity used Rayla's intelligence to begin a liberation campaign. Not a war, a liberation. Human ships arrived at Drenari-occupied worlds, not with weapons blazing, but with diplomats, aid supplies, and engineers. They dismantled the occupation infrastructure, freed the subjugated populations, and offered each liberated species the same thing: sovereignty, assistance, and friendship. No conditions, no demands. No empire building. It was, by every measure, the most expensive humanitarian operation in human history, and the United Earth Council funded it without a single dissenting vote. On Gumgang Station, Hana spent the months after the battle doing something that surprised her colleagues. She did not work on weapons. She did not improve Chendung, or design anything new that could kill. Instead, she wrote a paper. It was a long, detailed, deeply personal paper about the ethics of ultimate weapons. She wrote about the responsibility that comes with building something that can erase life on a massive scale. She wrote about the moral weight that the Creator carries, the weight that does not go away when the battle is over, the weight that she still felt every morning when she woke up and every night when she tried to sleep. The paper did not contain any technical specifications. What it contained was a framework, a set of principles for how civilizations should think about weapons that have the power to end everything. She argued that such weapons must never be built lightly, never be used easily, and never be celebrated. She argued that the moment a society begins to take pride in its ability to destroy, it has already lost something more important than any war. The paper was published in every major academic journal in human space. Within a year, it became required reading at every military academy, every diplomatic school, and every scientific institution. Cadets studied it alongside tactics and strategy. Diplomats referenced it in negotiations. Scientists quoted it when debating the limits of research. Hana never built another weapon. She spent the rest of her career studying gravitational physics for peaceful purposes, designing systems that could move asteroids, stabilize orbits, and terraform planets. She found that the same science that could crush a fleet could also build worlds. She preferred the building. Doyoon came home on a transport ship that landed at Incheon Spaceport on a gray Tuesday morning. His mother was waiting at the gate. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair, and she had been standing there since dawn, even though the transport was not scheduled to arrive until noon. Mothers are like that. Doyoon walked through the gate and saw her. He was still wearing his flight suit. He had a bruise on his forehead from where his helmet had rattled during the gravitational pulse. He looked older than when he had left, not in years, but in something behind his eyes. He did not say anything. He just walked to her and held her, and she held him, and they stood there for a long time while people moved around them. He was offered a promotion after the battle, a significant one. His commanding officer told him he had earned it, that his conduct during the engagement had been exemplary, that he had a future in fleet command if he wanted it. Doyoon thanked him and declined. He asked to remain a regular pilot in the 7th Rapid Strike Wing. When asked why, he said something that his commanding officer later wrote down and kept. "The war taught me that rank does not make you brave. Showing up does. I showed up as a pilot, and that is what I want to keep doing." Captain Yuna received what she had earned through years of service, and a battle that tested every skill she had. She was given command of her own battle group, a fleet of ships that answered to her and her alone. When she was asked to name her new flagship, she thought about it for 3 days. She considered names that sounded strong and fearsome, names that would intimidate enemies and inspire allies. In the end, she chose none of those. She named her flagship Quiet Sky, because what she fought for was not noise and fire and glory. It was silence. The silence of a galaxy where people could live without fear. The silence of a sky that was not burning. Admiral Ji-hoon retired 6 months after the battle. He had served for 42 years. He had commanded fleets, won wars, and made decisions that shaped the future of humanity. At his retirement ceremony, he stood at the podium in the same cemetery where he had been laying a wreath the day the Drenari arrived. The same memorial, the same names on the wall, plus 4,700 new ones. He looked out at the crowd of officers, soldiers, politicians, and civilians who had come to hear him speak. He took a breath, and he spoke the words that would be carved into monuments and taught to children for generations. We did not fight because we wanted to. We fought because they gave us no choice. Let this be the record. Humanity will always warn first. We will always offer peace first. We will always open the door for our enemies to walk away. But if they choose war, if they look at our mercy and see weakness, then they will learn what every species before them has learned. We are not the loudest voice in the galaxy. We are not the cruelest. But when the warning is ignored, we are the last thing you will ever face. He paused. Then he added, more quietly, and we will mourn you when it is over, because that is also what makes us human. Years passed. The story of the Drenari invasion became part of the galactic record, added to the long list of species that had challenged humanity and lost. It was studied, analyzed, and debated, but mostly it was remembered. Remembered by the species that lived alongside humans and knew them as builders and traders and friends. Remembered by the species that had been liberated from Drenari occupation and owed their freedom to human ships. And remembered, most importantly, by the species who had not yet encountered humanity and wondered what they would find when they did. On a quiet afternoon, years after the battle, a small exploration vessel from a young alien species called the Hereth crossed into human space for the first time. They were new to interstellar travel, ambitious and curious, expanding outward from their home system in search of trading partners and allies. The moment they crossed the border, they received an automated message. It was broadcast in their language, perfectly translated, warm and welcoming. Welcome. You have entered sovereign human space. We invite you to open diplomatic channels. We are a peaceful species. We would like to be your friends. Please respond at your convenience. The Hereth captain sat in his chair and read the message. Then he looked at his first officer, who pulled up a file on the main screen. It was the intelligence dossier on humanity. Every species compiled one before making first contact. The file contained the history of the Drenari invasion, and the war before that, and the war before that. It contained the records that Ji-hoon had once sent to Vorath, the records that showed what happened to every species that ignored the warning. The captain read the file slowly. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. His first officer asked, "What do we do, Captain?" The captain looked at the message on his screen. The friendly words, the open invitation, the gentle tone, and behind all of it, like steel beneath silk, the knowledge of what those friendly, peaceful people were capable of when pushed. He swallowed hard. Then he smiled, and he opened a diplomatic channel. He chose peace. And somewhere, in a quiet house on Earth, a retired admiral named Ji-hoon felt something ease in his chest. Not because he knew about the Hereth captain's choice. He did not. But because the sun was warm on his face, The sky was clear, and the world outside his window was silent, quiet, the way he had always wanted it to be.